Okay, welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're going to take some of those seemingly dry economic concepts and turn them into a pretty wild visual journey. We'll be traveling from the hidden, honestly sometimes completely invisible depths of business costs all the way up to the roller coaster of profit curves. If you've ever wondered how businesses actually figure out if they're making money or just spinning their wheels, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's dive in.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to hit the true cost of business, opportunity and social costs, fixed versus variable costs, short-run total costs, those famous U-shaped average costs, and finally, marginal cost and revenue. We'll move step by step from the abstract accounting ideas right down to the actual math on the factory floor. All right, section 1, the true cost of business, beyond the cash register. To really get this, we have to completely redefine how we look at expenses. Because, well, what an accountant sees on a spreadsheet is actually very different from what an economist sees. Think of your business costs exactly like an iceberg. We usually just fixate on the money we're paying out, right? That's the explicit tip of the iceberg, poking out above the water. But your true economic cost, it includes this massive hidden block of implicit costs lurking just below the surface. And if you ignore what's underwater, your business is probably going to sink before it even gets going. So the crucial thing here is contrasting those explicit money payments with the implicit costs. Explicit costs are super easy to spot. You write a check for raw materials, pay to rent, hand out wages. That's your basic accounting cost. But implicit costs, that's the estimated value of resources the firm already owns and uses. Like if you use your own building for a factory instead of renting it out to someone else, you're giving up that potential rental income. That lost income is a very real, implicit cost of doing business.
And this leads us to a really brilliant concept, normal profit. In economics, normal profit is actually treated as an implicit cost. Sounds like a total oxymoron, doesn't it? Profit as a cost? But think about it. It's essentially the minimal salary an entrepreneur absolutely has to pay themselves, so they don't just abandon the business entirely. If you aren't making at least your normal profit, you'd literally be better off closing up shop and taking a job somewhere else.
Moving right along to section 2, opportunity and social costs, the ripple effects of production. Let's look at how this builds into a much broader picture, because every single business decision creates ripple effects, forcing sacrifices for the firm and often for the wider world. At the core of this is opportunity cost. Imagine your factory has resources that could be used to make either cloth or bread. The opportunity cost of producing just 1 meter of cloth is exactly the 20 loaves of bread you had to sacrifice to do it. You simply can't do both with the same resources. In financial terms, this opportunity cost is the exact same thing as the total economic cost we just looked at. But we have to zoom out even further. We really need to compare private cost, which is just the firm's own economic burden, all those explicit and implicit costs, against social cost. If you're analyzing a company's true impact, you've got to look at the overarching burden that the entire society carries just because that product was manufactured. And the difference between those two can be drastic. External costs, say an oil refinery dumping waste into a river or a factory pumping out smog, are forcefully added to the private cost. The firm might not pay for that pollution on their own balance sheet, but society absolutely pays for it in health issues and cleanup. So private cost plus external cost equals your true social cost. Section 3, fixed versus variable costs, the factory floor reality. Okay, let's step right onto that factory floor and look at the short-run reality of a firm and what managers can actually control on a day-to-day basis. In economics, the short run isn't actually a specific amount of time on a calendar. It's simply a period where at least one factor of production is completely stuck. You've got fixed factors, like your heavy machinery or the factory building itself, that absolutely cannot be changed quickly. Contrast that with variable factors, like casual labor or raw materials, which you can instantly scale up or down depending on your production goals. These examples really hammer the point home. Your overhead fixed costs, rent, permanent salaries, interest, those have to be paid even if you produce absolutely zero. The factory could be pitch black and you still owe that money. Meanwhile, your avoidable prime costs, like raw materials and electricity, only kick in once you flip the switch and start producing. On to section 4, mapping short-run total costs, building the curves. Now for the fun part. Let's map these exact costs onto a graph and build those fundamental roller coaster curves that govern how a business actually operates. Notice how the total fixed cost line at the bottom is completely flat. It never changes, whether you're making 1 unit or 1,000.
But the total variable cost curve, that starts all the way down at zero because, hey, if you make nothing, you buy no materials. From there, it curves upward as your production expands. The big takeaway here is how the final total cost curve is actually constructed. It's built by taking that curved variable cost line and just stacking it directly on top of the flat fixed cost foundation. That is exactly why the total cost curve starts higher up on the y-axis. It starts right where the fixed costs begin. And the gap between the total cost and variable cost curves, that will always perfectly equal your total fixed cost. Section 5. The U-shaped average costs, the roller coaster of production. Now we need to look at costs on a per unit basis. And when we do this, it creates a very famous, unmistakable shape. So, you might be wondering, why do our per unit costs behave like this? They initially drop wonderfully as we produce more, which is great, making us more profitable. But then, inevitably, they begin to climb right back up. Why can't they just keep falling forever? Well, the answer lies in a fundamental rule, the law of variable proportions. Think about it practically for a second. As you keep cramming variable inputs, like more and more workers, into a fixed space, like a small factory floor, they eventually just start getting in each other's way. Efficiency plummets, you are paying for more labor, but you're getting less additional output, and that forces your average cost per unit to start rising again. Take a look at how the average total cost and average variable cost curves swoop down and then back up. Notice how they get incredibly close together as output expands on the right side, but they never ever touch. Why? Because the space between them is your average fixed cost. Since total fixed costs are being spread over more and more units, that average fixed cost gets tiny, but mathematically, it can never actually hit zero. And finally, Section 6, marginal cost and revenue, the final puzzle pieces. Let's connect our cost curves to the revenue side, because this is where we see the true mechanics of how a business makes its most critical survival decisions. There is just an absolute mathematical beauty to how these lines interact. The marginal cost curve, which is tracking the cost of producing just one additional unit, always swoops in and cuts the average cost curve exactly at its lowest point. Every single time, like clockwork. It all boils down to these three rules. Honestly, think of marginal cost as a magnet. When the cost of the next unit is lower than your average, it pulls the average down. When the cost of the next unit is higher than the average, it drags the average up. So the marginal cost essentially pulls the average cost down with it, bottoms it out right where they meet, and then drags it relentlessly back up. Now, pivoting over to the revenue side, imperfect competition completely changes the game. Under imperfect competition, to sell more items, a firm absolutely has to drop its price. Let's walk through a numerical schedule on the factory floor to see this in action. Imagine your output is rising from 1 to 7 units. To make those sales, your price, which is your average revenue, drops continuously by 2 rupees at each level. So it falls from 20 rupees down to 18, 16, all the way down to 8. Because prices have to keep falling to clear that inventory, your total revenue curve behaves really specifically. In the lower panel, you'll see it rising like a smooth, concave hill, from 0 up to its maximum peak, we'll call that point M, at output OQ. And then it starts sloping downward. It's increasing, sure, but at a decreasing rate. But here's the really wild part. Your marginal revenue, the extra cash from that next unit, falls exactly twice as fast as your price. It plunges by 4 rupees at every single step, eventually hitting 0 at 6 units and actually plummeting into negative territory at 7 units where MR is -4. Visually, in the upper panel where both curves slope downward, this creates a strict spatial relationship. The distance from the y-axis to the marginal revenue curve, let's call it AB, perfectly equals the distance from marginal revenue to average revenue, or BC. It proves that the marginal revenue curve always cuts through the exact midpoint of any horizontal line drawn from the average revenue curve straight back to the y-axis. Which leaves us with the ultimate cliffhanger for you to ponder today. If selling more units eventually costs more per item because of those U-shaped cost curves we talked about, and simultaneously earns less additional money per item because your marginal revenue is falling twice as fast as your price, how exactly does a smart entrepreneur find the perfect sweet spot? Somewhere in that intersection lies the secret to maximizing true economic profit. I'm going to leave you to think about exactly where that perfect equilibrium lies. Thanks for watching.